Hello and welcome to the next podcast, episode number 3, I think it is. Herko and Arthur. And today we're going to talk about the cards that are not in expeditions right now. This is more of an interesting topic and I find it fun to talk about these cards, why they are potentially removed from expeditions and they would add something. First, I want to explain how we know these cards are not expeditions. There is a Google Doc with all of the different card buckets, and I will post a link to it in the description. And you can basically see all the different champions, all the different cards. That's how we know so much about these different card pools. As you see on the top, there are also appearance rates, so some buckets appear way more often. And I don't want to go too much into detail, but basically you can know which cards are in which pools. Now this list is not perfectly accurate, there are some cards missing, but we also have our experience and see which cards are actually represented or not. And Arthur actually made an expedition occurrence rate. Basically, I'm not sure how this works exactly, basically calculating how likely it is to see a card in expeditions depending on the pools and the appearance rate. Did I explain that correctly, Arthur? Or want to add something?
Yeah, it's essentially taking the expeditions spreadsheet from Alex, and it's anything where there are bonus offering rates, it's multiplying it by 4 if it's 400%, 5 if it's 500%, half if it's 50%, just so that we can see which cards is more likely to come up in the initial offerings of the bucket.
Okay, interesting. And it's definitely good also for knowing what to play around. For example, Sharpside is way less likely to be seen as Shadestone. Another mention is that the tier list is out from Herko, and I will also post a link in the description, and we will use it in the end of the draft as well. Now, I went through this whole list as well and made like a gigantic Word document that's not out yet, and basically listed all of these cards and champions and in which buckets they appear. And so I know in detail which card is in which bucket and which card is in no bucket at all. And that's where we know have this list of cards that are not in. Okay, let's switch over to the cards. And we of course have to lead with the one champion that's actually not in expeditions right now. And this champion is Tryndamere. After he should distinguish between some cards who were in certain buckets and then got removed, and some cards who never were in buckets and never got added to any bucket. Tryndamere used to have his own bucket, but then he got buffed, he got this tough again, and he got removed from expeditions. It was pretty broken in beta, I think, and it was tough and there was no good removal for him. But I think this changed right now and don't like that just one champion randomly is not available in expeditions at all. What are your opinions on that?
I only play expeditions, and I completely forgot that he got given tough right before he was removed from expeditions. So I've never actually had to play against it having tough. Certainly, when he was in expeditions, I felt he was strong but not unbeatable. Generally, it would be things like detain and capture effects that would be able to get him before he flips, or after he flips, there will be hard removal, like Vengeance. Nowadays, we have Dawning Shadows as well. So, yeah, I certainly don't think he should be removed for power level reasons. I certainly don't think he would be the number one champion. So there would definitely be more stronger champions that would warrant being removed for power reason purposes.
Like, and even for late game reasons, we have a Radiant Soul just having Space Shield and immediately drawing a card. Certainly a more powerful late game card than Tryndamere. Erko, did you ever get to play with Tryndamere? Or
In expeditions, no. I don't remember. At least I don't remember having played. But I also don't think he was that strong. I mean, and what I remember Riot Dev saying is that they were planning to put him back. So I want to know what's the reasoning behind him. Sincerely.
Yeah, this statement was like 4 months ago, so we will have to see if they change the buckets again, put him back in. Certainly would hope so. Okay, and let's move to the other cards that are not in expeditions. Some are just unplayable and we don't talk too much about them, and others are like more interesting. The first one that's not in expeditions, thankfully, is this Caustic Cask. I don't know what this card is doing, but it was designed. It's probably for some future champion like Urgot or Sek, but for right now there's no ephemeral synergy with PNC, and even the other card that generates these Caustic Casks, the used Cask Salesman, is just a terrible card, and I'm glad that the original 0 mana 0/1 not in expeditions.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's a collectible card at all. It looks like a card that could well just be a uncollectible token. So I think it's fine that they don't put it into expeditions because it will be an automatic pass skip. So that's fine.
At least you could discard it, but it's great to have to auto pass on a card all the time. Okay, all the other 0-cost cards are in the expeditions. Next one is sadly Adaptatron 3000, the McDonald's cards. Find him really funny. I think they could have slotted him into the Heimerdinger card pool. Wouldn't have hurt. He's an epic anyways, so he would rarely come up, but I can see why they didn't include him at all.
It seems to be, I don't know, of all the Yordles that we got to with Vandal City, like Lulu and Tristana and existing Yordles that we had in the game, Heimer was the only one that didn't get any support at home. Kind of have a hunch that they are waiting for more cards that would support the Heimer archetypes for it to be included in expeditions. That's just a wild guess on my end.
Yep.
Yeah, a common trend that we'll see across a lot of these cards is that they're very situational, meaning that they might be quite good some of the time, but most of the time they're pretty bad. They're very high synergy cards. And Adaptatron, I think, falls into that category in that it's just kind of too weak without significant build around from tech.
It's a filler 1-drop, I would say. Without tech, it's just the same stats as Drop Water. And Drop Water is not great if you play it alone, but also not the end of the world. I can see why it's not. Okay, the next one, and that one's really making me sad, is the Dancing Droplet. If you are new to Legend of Runeterra and don't know the design philosophy, there are always cards being added to older archetypes. Basically, for example, Spiders was around since better, then they got a new 2/5 that buffs all the spiders way later on. And similarly, Dancing Droplet got added to the Total Recall archetype of recalling your own units. I think it's a very flavorful card and a great card, and I'm very sad to see it not be in expeditions at all.
I think Dancing Droplet could probably stay in expeditions. There was a time when it was, and certainly without the attune, I think it's not too strong or anything. I think a 1-mana 1/1 elusive is fine, and generally self-recalling is not a very strong archetype, so having a slight buff wouldn't be too bad.
I'd like to correct you. It was never in expeditions because I started tracking the buckets when the Relia came out. We didn't have the buckets, so I always paid attention to Dancing Droplet and it never was in expeditions.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was a trade pick that I've seen it from before then. that might be something else that we should clarify
Mhm.
for this episode, that the cards that we're talking about here are not present in any of the buckets or archetypes in the expedition spreadsheet, which means that when we do the first 14 picks of the draft, they will never show up. However, any cards can show up in trade picks, including these. So that is the 15th pick, the last pick of the draft, and then any of the other picks that happen during the draft, not including the first champion and the second champion. So the first win and the third win, the champion picks.
Exactly, and you can also get these cards from generated cards. For example, if you play like a Citymare, you can get the Loping Telescope, or if you have like the Contrologist, you can get some of these spells. So it's certainly possible to see them, but it's just not possible to draft them.
Yeah, I generated a Pokey Stick from Contrologist the other day and killed someone with it when they were on 1 in response to a grasping the 5 mana 3 drain 3 spell. And I didn't realize at the time that it was not possible to get an expedition outside of trade picks and generated spells. So I still felt pretty lucky.
I once generated the Leviathan from a Loping Telescope, which is also in expeditions. And the Loping Telescope came from a Citymare. So quite a long combination of lethal get.
Did you have Swain at the time?
What?
Did you have Swain?
No, I just used it to deal 3 damage to the Nexus.
Oh. Yeah, that works. It would have been funny if it actually drew Swain though. So
Yeah, no, don't be too much.
That would be fun. Okay, let's move on to the next card. We had the Dancing Droplet, and the next one is not Flower Child, but Greenglade Caretaker. A pretty weird card in my opinion. It's a synchron constructed play, but it's basically an aggressive card for the barrier archetype and a very situational one in that. And the barrier archetype usually wants to be a little bit more mid-rangey, a little bit slower. It was in expeditions before, but it was removed. I've never missed it basically.
yeah, I think I remember seeing it back in the days when Shen was a bit more popular in the base set. I don't think it was anything too great because the Ionia half of Shield War was never particularly strong. I remember it potentially getting buffed to 3/2s and 5/2s and stuff, but at the base, I think it's just kind of average as a card.
Without barriers, it's just terrible. Just a 1/2. You never want to put it in your deck.
Mm-hmm.
I like the art. It's like a half minute. Okay. So next card on our list is the Greenglade Lookout, and then you have Herko on your list. Herko, did you know that you are on the list?
I'm on the list.
Yes, Oblivious Islander.
That's good old Uncle Herko.
Always fishing for the news.
Oh, we're fishing. We be fishing here. That really went pretty well.
Do you know the story of this guy? I listened to it shortly. And it's basically a Viking champ. He's called Olaf, and he was fighting on Shadow Isles. And this guy was just fishing, not knowing that he was on Shadow Isles. And Olaf just walked up to him, and they looked at him angrily. And then Olaf just walked away, and he just walked away or swam away as well. So he actually is a figure out of the lore connected to Olaf. Found it pretty funny.
Oh, I never knew that. Is that story from the Riot website?
I watched the Necrit video. They talks about all the original cards, and he basically tells the story. I don't know where the
I
original
didn't
comes
know
from.
that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
But he certainly a card that's fun in labs and fun in ready to play the Constructed with Cythria. I'm a little bit sad that it's not in Expeditions as well. The Ephemeral can be a downside, but you can just skip on the effect and just play him as a 1-2 if you, as a 2-1 if you want that. I think it's so terrible.
Yeah, that's actually, well, of course I have a soft spot for that card, but it's the kind of card that I think I would love to see in Expeditions, because it doesn't seem too powerful. It does require some scale, and does require some we were talking on the chat previously with Conan and Solitary about activated abilities, like cards that do more stuff than just being bodies on the board. And this kind of cards that provide like a choice that you need to make, I think this is very interesting type of card. So I'm sad to not see this one on the pool.
So wait, you actually have the choice, you have the ability to not grant your ally ephemeral if you want to?
Yes, it's the same with Thumb Dredger. You Thumb Dredger says discard a card to draw one. You can just click OK instead of selecting a card, and then you just play him normally. That's the same with the Islander.
Yep.
Okay, you learned something new. I've obviously never played with this card because it wasn't an expedition. So the effect, I would assume, in expeditions is mostly a drawback. So most of the time, you'd probably just want to be passing on that. But sometimes, yes, if you have a very strong ability, then it can be an asset.
And you can power out something like a Hecarim. You don't really care if Hecarim dies if you get the big attack in.
Actually, I would suspect, as far as I know, this feature, let's call it, that you can choose not to do something that the card does, like for example, not choosing another card in your hand, is something recent. If the card didn't have this, and I think it didn't have this particularity at back in open beta, so to speak, then I would call it a weak card. Maybe that's why it's not in the pool. Like it would be I mean, if you had always had to choose one of your cards, then I would call this card a liability. So maybe that's why we don't have it on the pool. Like they never bothered to put it back when they decided to make this ability, so to speak, something you can choose not to do, basically.
I can see that. Okay, next card is Pix, the evil fairy of Lulu, and is another one of these very situational cards. Sure, you get the +2/+1 of a 1-drop, but Pix used to be in expeditions, and I don't know, it just died all the time when you attacked with it, and obviously did nothing on defense. So I'm glad it got removed and made this support strategy a little bit stronger. Never missed it.
Yeah, I agree with that. A 0-2 is pretty useless in terms of stats, and this one actually needs to get into combat. It's not even like Weirding Stones or Faces of the Old or anything like that that can stay behind. So this didn't really see any use in expeditions.
I like the story of the card a lot, like this evil fae taking control of stuff, and Lulu is just like oblivious to everything that's happening around her. I read like a fan story that Shaker was controlled by Pix. That was very fun. Okay, so there is a special Poro bucket, so most of the Poros are actually next expeditions, just in this Poro bucket. Some like the Affectionate Poro or the Lonely Poro are in other buckets as well. There's only one missing, and that's the Plunder Poro. Don't know why this guy was left out. Honorable mention. You live on in our heart, Plunder Poro. It would be probably terrible in the Poro deck as well. Having to activate Plunder is pretty hard, and probably would be the weakest Poro even in a Poro deck.
Yeah, and I would guess, looking at the stats that we have from Lord Guardian, that puts Bilgewater as one of the weakest regions, I would guess basically they removed or didn't add the weakest card to the weakest region, so to speak.
Yeah.
That might not have to be the case if it only ends up in the Poro archetype. So normal Bilgewater decks wouldn't have to see Plunder Poro because it won't be in a Poro archetype. I personally don't think it's that much worse than a lot of the other Poros. So I think it's fine to be included, but I'm also not missing it that it's gone. So
maybe we can talk about another card first. It's the patched Porobot. We are talking about Poros. I really like this guy, and I think it's one of the best designs ever. Just having this random keyword that changes and good stat lines. I think this card would be great in many archetypes, especially in expeditions, where the stats actually matter. And it was really fun to have this and have the keyword change each time. It would certainly help Poro decks as well. I don't see why this should be excluded. It would certainly not be too powerful. It would just be a fun card.
yeah, I agree with that. A 2-mana 2/3 in expeditions is just fine basically, and with an extra keyword that you have to time properly, I think that could be quite fun. Expeditions is very much about kind of finding that randomness, finding that variance, and doing the most out of it. So I think this would be a fun addition.
Okay, then let's move on to another unplayable one. This Shadow Fiend, just a big ephemeral unit you certainly don't want to see in any of your decks or drafts ever. I would like to have it removed from the whole expeditions so that I can't get it of double trouble all the time, or of the petty officer. It's way too often that I get a Shadow Fiend and a 0/1. That's stopped playing double trouble almost altogether. Please remove it from the 1-cost pool as well. Otherwise, I'm happy it's Garden Expeditions.
Yeah, ephemeral cards in general are a bit weak, and this one is pure stats, so it's not very helpful. I'm wondering why some of the other ephemeral ones are still in expeditions, for example, Darkwater Scourge, and potential. I assume it's because there are other things than stats. It's got keywords, and you can combo it with other things like Mask Mother. But yeah, this one on its own probably doesn't warrant a space.
Mm-hmm. And it's at least in the same region like Mask Mother and the Darkwater Scourge, so you can combo it in Mono Shadow Isles, but Ionia. I guess the combo was with Deathmark, play it on turn 3 and then Deathmark something and kill it, but that's just a pretty terrible combo. Deathmark still in expeditions, by the way, so I'm still full of this combo with the ephemeral unit.
Okay.
Yeah. So next on our list, we have Shroud of Darkness, a card I've seen a lot recently, because apparently everybody picks it from Contrologist, but not a good standalone card, because it's just +1/+0 and Space Shield this round, basically a combo enabler. You protect your card from one round. If you play MTG, get like these quicken effects or similar cards. The next spell you cast can't be countered. And I guess Shroud of Darkness wants to be something similar, but it's way too situational to be worth in expeditions.
Yeah, I've never seen this card before. I didn't realize it said this round, which is terrible. I was thinking it was +1/+0 and Spell Shield grant it forever, in which case it might have been fine, but if it was only this round, that's really not worthwhile.
Really bad card. And next one was, no, not the next one. The next one is Entrapment. Move on to the second, the 2-cost cards. And this one is, I think, a fun card, but it would be a pretty terrible card to be included in expeditions, since it's either a high roll or a low roll. Either you hit a card which they have like 7 or 8 copies of it, then it just is 2 mana for 20 puff caps, or it's just a one-off and then you get only 3 puff caps. I like it mostly for the information it gives. It's great in Bird. You just know when they draw a certain card, probably in Constructed, it might be playable in some decks, but Expeditions would just be a super high roll card.
Yeah, this is I mean, not this particular card, but what you said about getting information. that's one of the type of cards I like to see more, because that's the type of card that usually doesn't work well when constructed. I mean, usually getting information about your opponent is not very valuable because you already know what you just look at the champions in contracts constructed, and you usually know the list almost card by card. And in tournaments, you do know this because you can see it. So information gathering cards are usually not worth it in constructed, but in expeditions they would be. So I doubt we're gonna see cards tailored specifically for the game mode we love. But yes, I would definitely love to see more cards that are about losing a bit of tempo or some other advantage in exchange for getting to know what your opponent has. Probably we're not gonna be able to see what's in their hand. From what I've seen, sort of Riot doesn't want to go too much in that direction. I mean, they went with the aloof travelers, and a lot of people don't like it. At least judging by Reddit, they don't like when the cards from their opponent messes with their hand. But gathering information about what the other guy might hold and maybe in their deck, something like that—that's the sort of cost that I think would be nice in expedition. I would love to see more of those myself.
So you are a fan of pranks in expeditions, Herko?
Hmm?
Are you a fan of pranks in expedition?
I'm a fan of pranks everywhere. I mean, I love this card as an archetype. I mean, as a mechanic, discarding cards, and I would love to be able to discard more cards from my opponents.
Yeah.
I understand it's a feel bad moment. I mean, many people don't like it, and I understand why Riot is sort of not trying to go too much in that direction. But yeah, I absolutely would love that kind of thing. But gathering information about what is on the other guy deck, like just information, not messing with their stuff, like knowing what's in there, in constructed is pretty much worth it. You know what's in there. But in expedition, that's valuable information. So I would like to see more of those. And I don't think it's going to be a feel bad moment, right? I mean, if you cast something and you spend 1 or 2 mana and lose tempo just to get information on what deck, for example, maybe with some other effect, I don't think people are going to feel bad about it. And that would be the kind of cards I would like to see more.
Yeah. I think it's part of Bandel's region identity. Like this card, you have Tricksy Tentacles, you have the Pranks, you have Aloof Travelers. Messing with your opponent's hand, certainly something we can see more of in the future. Okay, next card we have. Now we have my card I wanted to mess around with, Field Promotion. So this one I was really excited to have in expeditions because you could do some funky combos with it, give you a Teemo Scout, or give you a MF Scout herself. Wanted to try this card out and play with it. Sadly, I never got to play with it because I get included in expeditions ever. I didn't want to build a constructed deck just for messing with it. Definitely one card I'm missing.
I do think it's pretty weak on its own, though. I think the value of Scout probably isn't worth 2 in a card outside of something like Teemo. And then the Elite tag is also worth very little. So I'm not even sure if I would play it if it were 1 mana burst. So I can see why they think it might be a bit too situational for expeditions.
Yeah, it's for sure situational, but it would be fun, even with like cards like Ras Bloodmane, just giving your opponent's board -7, -4, -0. That's stuff that never works in constructed, but might be fun in expeditions. Not that it's a good card, fun card. Okay, next up, a card that was in expeditions and got removed, and Intrepid Marina. I'm just noticing we also missed the card Ghosts. We can talk about those together. So Intrepid Marina as a support gives an ally elusive, and Ghost is an Ionia card that just gives an ally elusive this round. And I should mention that not all of the elusive givers were removed. We still have the Sumpwork Scavenger, the map was removed. And we also have the new Bandle card, the Shell game that also gives a unit elusives. in a round. But I guess the argument was shouldn't be randomly killed by a big elusive unit in expeditions. It should be more predictable or higher deck building cost. Give something elusive. Intrepid Marina, definitely a fun card. Liked having elusive Dariuses, for example.
Back when it was in expeditions, I don't remember it being particularly strong.
No.
Yes, there is the argument of you can be killed out of nowhere, but I think most of the time that didn't happen, and most of the time the 2-mana 1/3 will just die in combat. The elusive will not get blocked, but it's almost as if you have the 2-mana 3/2 Noxus that gives quick attack, and then the other person just choose not to block because you don't want to give them a free unit. So I think Marina is probably fine to include in expeditions. I don't think it will be too strong. And I feel the same way about Ghost. I feel like it's pretty high risk, high reward. Sure, it could be, 1 mana, 8 damage or something. But the times when it's not really worthwhile. So I think both, if they're removing it, I wouldn't say it because of power level reasons.
Okay, next card. I'm not sure why it's not in expeditions. The Keeper of Masks just gives each ally +1/+0. It used to be in Discipline in the Mono Ionia pool. Now it's just in no pool whatsoever. It was just a nice filler card for aggressive Ionia decks. I think it should be excluded. It's a little bit rare for Ionia to have good stats and a good effect. Still a nice filler card. What to say about it?
Yeah, it was pretty average when it was around. So,
Yeah.
surprising. Yeah.
Now let's move on to the more interesting ones, maybe surprising ones. Loping Telescope, the one card that was insane in Constructed, is not in expeditions. It's only if you see it, it's got generated by something. But I certainly think it will come around when like Yumi or a champion that's it's supposed to go with shows up, and it will be an insane card in expeditions, I would say. Just getting these epics that are often powerful, these celestials or even multi-region followers, just like 2-mana 2/1, drawing a card, it's just such insane value. I'm sure it comes in the next expansion. Now it's not.
Yeah, I can see why they didn't include it in Expedition, having played with it quite a lot in Constructed. On the one hand, there's one thing that I guess Riot always wants to consider, which is the feel bad moment when you get destroyed by an epic spec. That happened in Constructed a lot. And also the value that it would give you when you pay one telescope into the other. So I would guess it was this was one card that was let's say withheld from Expedition based on power level.
It probably was, but I think now that it can't generate other Loping Telescopes, I think it would be fine if they include it in expeditions. I think it's a strong card. It's stronger than the Aberration Sentry, for example. 2-mana 2/1 draws a card when it dies because you get the choice and you get it straight up. But I certainly don't think it will break expeditions wide open or anything. So I think it's fine to include.
I think it will be included in future patches.
Yeah, so hopeful.
Right. Okay, next one is pretty terrible. Don't have to waste too much time on it. Monkey Business. Just summoning powder monkeys, 2 ephemeral units at best. That just deal some random damage. It's never playable. Used to be in expeditions, but I never picked it up. Worth it.
Yeah, most ephemeral cards on its own just is too situational to be good, so I can understand why they removed it.
Let's move on to the next more interesting one. Pokey Stick, the constructed staple, actually not in expeditions. And I was so surprised by this card existing, it was insane. Because I'd played like 30 expeditions when Ban City came out, and then everybody in constructed started playing this card, and it was like, what does it do? I'm so confused. It literally took me like 3 weeks to learn what Pokey Stick does because I play expeditions. It's like a key card for Bandle City, but just not in any of the buckets.
It was also a card that they forgot, so to speak, to include in the wheels. It was something that we found out, I think, on patch day. Somebody was, how you call it, data mining things, but it wasn't included on the reveal. So it's like a card that everybody went, whoa, we didn't expect this one while theory crafting, for example.
Exactly, and it should really have an animation. It makes me so sad that it's just not a stick poking someone, just like a giant fireball dealing 1 damage. Certainly a downside. Missing animations. But yeah, you see it quite often with the Contrologist. It's always a good pick, but can't put it into a deck. But I think it would be an out to include in most decks. Dealing 1 damage, replacing itself. That seems really strong. Not sure whose hand this is. Hard work. Doesn't matter. What are you thinking, Arthur?
Yeah, I think it's strong. It's a bit more than half the 4 mana spell from P&Z that does 1 damage to 2 targets. This is essentially 1 damage to 1 target for half the price, but you also get 1 card rather than half a card. And yeah, I think it's pretty good. You can always cast it off spell mana. There will usually be situations where there will be a 1 toughness creature you want to kill, or they trade it in a way that you will end up having a 1 toughness target. So I think it would be a pretty strong card in Expeditions.
Agreed. Okay, next one, a card I also forgot that existed until they changed the labs. It's Scrapdash Assembly, summoning those 2 scrap scuttlers. I think this card is just crap and wouldn't be that strong in Expeditions. Just the random 1/1s. There's not really a swarm archetype in PNC, unless you combine it with Noxus. But then just 2 mana 2/2 split up into 1/1s. Doesn't seem amazing to me.
Yeah, a 2 mana 2/2 is below rate. And that being split across 2 bodies is worse on the offense, better on defense. But then if you're just looking for some trump blockers, there are kind of 2 mana for 3/1/1 ephemeral that will be able to block better. So I think this on its own is subpar enough that I can understand why they took it out.
Fully agreed. Even this Haunted Relic, the 3 ephemerals, is not a great card. And the next one, the FTB Bust, would be very happy to hear that. Call the Wild is no longer in Expeditions. Used to plague most of the Freljord buckets, or many Freljord buckets, searching for Yetis, Poros, and Elnax. But those were never that popular and could never get needed for this card to be more than 3 mana, do nothing. And I'm very happy they got removed.
Yeah, I agree with that. Presumably for constructed purposes, they can't buff it to, say, 6 cards or something. But if you think about how many cards is worth a draw spell, these days we're thinking probably 3 mana for about 2 cards is about on rate. So you really need to stack your deck with almost half your deck with Yetis, Poros, and Elnax before you can kind of reliably draw 2 cards from it. And then Yetis, Poros, and Elnax aren't very strong. So yeah, this is a bit too synergy focused to be included in Expeditions.
Exactly. Okay. Then the next one is the one I understand probably the least not be on the list. It's Fuzzy Caretaker. As you can see, it's prismatic because I played it quite a lot when it was around. Just a fun support card that was never too strong. 3 mana 3/2 and passing these stats around. I don't think it's overpowered in any way. I'm just kind of confused why it's not appearing anymore in any of them. At least in the collective support bucket, they could have left it and do what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have played with it before. It's not exciting, and I've played against it. It's fine for the support decks. Outside of it, it's a bit understated, but in the right situations, it can be decent. So I think it should have been kept in.
Read. Next one is terrible. Just skip it. Passage Unearned. Obliterating all units that were summoned but played. Clearly a card for constructed purposes, like get the Anivia combo deck or something. But not a standalone card. It's just absolute. Too situational, too trash. Don't think anything we have to talk about too long. Okay, Sap Magic is similar. It used to be in expeditions, but just healing your allies for 3 is not really something Shadow Isles wants to do, and just paying 3 mana for tossing 3 is not really worth it. I guess it's in the Maokai for like Maokai mirrors that you have a gem spell you can play over and over again without just losing. And this gem spell can't be too powerful on its own. The card is just awful. It was never playable when it was around.
I'm amused by your idea that there is a Maokai mirror in expeditions. Presumably there has been at some point, maybe when Maokai was first released, but that would have been an interesting game. I forgot that Sap Magic was Maokai's champion spell because I don't think I've ever had 2 Maokais in the same game, as a one in play, one in hand. But yeah, it's pretty weak, and I'm not surprised that it's been left out.
I mean, it's just from design purposes. If you make it like a real card, if you make it heal your Nexus as well, for example, then it's just Maokai tosses all the time, and then only double Maokai is left, and then you just heal 3 every turn in addition to not decking out. That would be probably too strong. Why this card is held so weak. That's certainly not a real card. Okay, next one is interesting again. It's Stress Defense. One of the key identity cards, in my opinion, for Bandit City. A really fun card in Constructed. Just either saving your unit, stopping a strike spell, really flexible card, really strong card. And I'm kind of surprised to see it not be in any of these new buckets.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's not in there as well. To be fair, I'm also surprised that it's seeing so much play in Constructed. But I can see why, given how flexible it is. Another Contrologist story was that I managed to prank someone's judgment to play around, and but then I managed to, and I was wondering how do I play around this judgment if he doesn't tap out. And then I managed to Contrologist into a stress defense, which was the perfect answer in response to his judgment. It just did 1 damage to everything, and I'm guessing that's something he did not expect. So it certainly came in handy.
Herko, do you have a good stress defense story as well? Herko? Yes, Herko doesn't.
Oh, sorry.
I just asked if you have a good stress defense story as well for us.
No, nothing as spicy like that.
Never played this card. Yeah. Definitely a fun one. I used to play it in Darkness Control just as a one-off. Surprise my opponents trying to kill the Vega in the mirror, for example, with 4 damage. And it survives and then back off. It was cut pretty soon. This was certainly a fun card. Okay. Another one is Yordle Newbie. Right, Yordle Newbie. I should mention that the bundle side of Teemo is bugged and doesn't currently appear at all, but even in this Teemo bundle half, the Yordle Newbie is not listed, and I'm not sure why this isn't in Darkness or anything like that. Seems like either understated or a little bit overstated, 3 mana 3/2 or 3 mana 4/4. You see with Kahiri, that was never such a big problem, like for Kahiri. Just be a decent filler card for Darkness. Other decks to come.
I do think in the state it currently is, it would be pretty weak. Because 2+ cards to your hand this round is quite a lot to ask for, and I'm having difficulty thinking of a time when it could actually be possible on turn 3. I think it will be pretty difficult. And if it's really coming down any later than turn 3, a 4/4 for 3, sure, is well statted, but it's also not that impressive in turns later than turn 3. So I can understand why they've left it out.
I should mention, because we don't know usually, because we never played these cards, but I actually tested it, and it counts your first card draw. You just have to draw another card, you just have to add one random card to your hand. Even if you just Pokey Stick something, then it's already enabled. It's pretty low requirement, even if you play like a mushroom generator, like the, what's it called? Clump of Farms, it's enabled already.
Okay. In that case, yeah, that makes it a lot easier to trigger. Still on turn 3, you're, I guess, trying to do it on with some spell mana. So yeah, Pokey Stick would be perfect if that was in Expeditions. Outside of that, if you're trying to do it with a Darkness generator, it would be, for example, on turn 5 when you play the 2-mana Dark Bulb Acolyte, and then with the 3-mana on Yordle Newbie. But if that's the case, a 3-mana 4/4 on turn 5 is strong, but it's not the end of the world. So I think you'll see the downside of the 3-mana 3/2 being a lot more prevalent, and still don't think it will be particularly strong.
Probably just a filler unit in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next one. I was really surprised to see this not being in Expeditions is Battle Bonds. I would ask 95% of players what Battle Bonds does. They would probably not know it. It was a card added recently. It's in the newest expansion, granting 2 allies +2/+2. And I'm seriously confused by this card. Like, if it's not an Expeditions card, it's obviously not a constructed card. So why did you create this card at all? Just, what is this card doing?
I know the answer to that. You played a lot in labs in the ultra rapid draw. It's a very common card there. I played that mode a lot. I love that one, and that card comes up a lot, I would say.
Okay. But I don't think they made it just for one lab mode. I certainly expected it to be in like one of these random Taric buff style decks or buckets.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you see this card and it looks like the perfect one card that you would see in Expeditions. I have no clue what they didn't include it in Expeditions, but the ultra rapid probably comes up quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, comparing it to something like it's in Demacia as well. Comparing it to something
No, it's in
like
Targon.
oh, sorry, it's in Targon. Oh, wow, the art makes it really look like it's in Demacia. I guess maybe because the most direct comparison would be to Laurent Bladekeeper, 4-mana 3/3 now. Grant an ally +2/+2. So this looks relatively weaker in comparison, unless you can get two things that really benefit from the buff. For example, Fiorel, or something that really helps with the buff Zed or something. But usually, the Bladekeeper would be a lot stronger than this one, so it seems a bit underpowered.
Exactly, and it's also a slow spell. If it was at least fast, it would be quite strong. Sure, even if just give +2/+2 this round, it would just be a smaller back-to-back. So it would be actually playable, but just as a slow spell, it seems so terrible. I still just don't understand the design of the card at all. Okay. Next up, Citybreaker, who we all played in labs, I'm guessing, like Mr. Swain, but it was never a real card in Expeditions. Just 2 beds of stats, and the round start just comes up too rarely. What do you think, Herko? Do you like this card?
I think it has flavor, but yes, no. It doesn't seem like a card I died to draft, basically.
Funny question would be, is it an upgrade to make it just a landmark? Just make it like a 4-mana landmark, round start, deal 1 to the enemy. Would that be an upgrade?
Actually, that would be interesting at least.
I think that would be a downgrade because I think the weakness of Citybreaker is not because that it's hard to destroy, which would be the main benefit from it making it a landmark. It's just that it doesn't have enough stats. And if you're making it effectively unable to block things, even like at least the 1/5 is able to block 3/2 twice. Back when it was a 0/5, it was even worse.
Indeed.
Yeah, at least it's a 1/5 now. But yeah, I think making a landmark would be worse because right now, with Citybreaker, kind of like Dragon Chow, you can jump with it, once or twice or something, and that's helpful.
I'm just thinking of the other, like MTG has a lot of these random enchantments that just deal 1 damage each turn, and they are sometimes playable, probably if they drain 1, playable, I'm not sure. I think if Citybreaker, the problem is if you die to it, then you kill it, but if you don't die to it, you can ignore it. So it would certainly make it interesting if it was a landmark, in my opinion.
Yeah, it would have to be much cheaper, but I could
Not
see
much cheaper. If you make it like a 2-drop landmark, then it would be too strong.
Yeah, but by putting off on a clock, I would say. Also, I guess I guess there's something to be said about different skill levels of the players. In my experience, the lower you go on skills, the longer the games go, and because people don't dare attacking each other. So anything that puts a clock on the other guy is kind of interesting. I think that at the top level, at you two guys, being extremely efficient is what wins you the game. But at lower skill levels, in which people are more conservative and talk to each other, anything that puts a clock on the other guy is kind of interesting.
Okay. Next card, actually on the other side of the Ionian invasion, is the Coastal Defender, and I was really surprised to see this card not be included in like one of the token attacks buckets. Would be a perfect nerf to this bucket. I think this card is really strong. Actually, I played it like 5 times through trade picks, and was like reliably a 4-mana 6/6, which is just good, certainly not overpowered, and you can still wear it down. In my opinion, would be a good card, but certainly not good enough to exclude from expeditions. Certainly not a constructed card, so should probably be an expedition.
It came in with Aurelia and Azir, so I'm surprised it didn't get put into expeditions in that bucket token attack.
Yeah.
I think it is average. I think the fact that sometimes it's a 4/6, sometimes a 2/6, sometimes it's a 6/6 or more, kind of averages out in the long run. So I think it's not particularly good or bad. I think it's just about average.
Would be a nice filler card. I certainly didn't mind playing it. It was always nice, and you would have like some outplay scenarios where I just summon a unit at burst speed if the time has come, and then blew my opponent out. It's a fun card. Next one, another terrible card. I hate seeing this card in labs, Encroaching Shadows. Just
yes.
so bad.
that's
So
I
bad.
lose the game, basically.
I once had 2 in my opening hand in Urd. Just had like 2 cards that are playable. It has such a good animation as well, but sadly, such a high Billerun card, but probably never good to play it out.
No, never.
If you've never seen this animation, go into a bot game and look at it. It's just so good.
Yeah, I've never seen it before. It does look like 4 mana lose the game, so that's not a deal I'm looking for.
Indeed. Let's move on to another one that was.
I surrender.
What?
I surrender card. I surrender.
Exactly. There was a constructed deck once with it.
You click concede, so yeah. Paying 4 mana to concede doesn't seem worthwhile.
Okay, another one that was removed, and some people would actually play around this card, especially if you come from Constructed, is the box. And this card, nobody remembers it anymore from the veteran expedition players because it's gone for a few months now. But it's really strong if you get it from Trade Pick Star because nobody plays around it, in my opinion. It was always average before hand. Surprising to me that they removed such an iconic card.
I'm surprised they removed it as well, but in my experience, it has always been kind of middling, if anything, not very strong. 4 mana to deal 3 is not a great rate. 4 mana to deal 6, as in 3 to 2, would be pretty good, and any more would be great. But the chance of that happening is not that much in expeditions. Although saying that, I don't know if it ever really mixed with Bandle City, because obviously Bandle City is a lot about swarming with a lot of small units, in which case the box is great at. But the fact that it's you need to time it exactly correctly to trap the cards that you want to kill on the turn they're summoned, I would rather have something like Gotcha, which is still 4 mana, 3 damage, but you can use it anytime. So
I would say 4 mana deal 3 is not that terrible. You have Gotcha, you have Aftershock, playable. But it's the fact that it's situational. I think this situationalness makes up for the timing. It's really good. Killing 3 units, 4 units, which it has certainly done for me, and it's quite strong. Hard card to play, but you don't have to remember it anymore. Another card that a lot of people play around, but it just doesn't exist, is Decimate. The Noxus can't kill you from 4 mana, 4 life easily. Can from 3 life, but you're kind of safe at 4 life. Kind of. It used to be an expeditions.
Surprising not that card. Yeah, that's surprising not to see. I mean, because it's a simple card to understand. It's a constructed staple, so I'm really not sure why they didn't include it there.
It used to be in the Darius card pool, but got removed. Update.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Captain Farron is of course an insane card, just dealing 8 damage over time. I guess Decimate was just too random. I'm not sure.
I think it will be fine to include, but I also think it's fine to take out. It's a little bit of a new player trap because they might overestimate Nexus Burn, so they might think it's a good card, but then just stop short because they put lots of these into the deck rather than trying to develop on the board. I assume when it was being played that it had pretty low stats, so I'd rather just play a 5 mana creature that's on rate rather than 5 mana deal 4 to the Nexus.
Yeah, actually, I was what in my case it was the opposite, so to speak. It was a constructed trap for me in the sense that I didn't expect that card to be good. Like I saw it, why I want to spend 5 mana to deal 4. Well, actually, apparently, just did make a very good calculation on the constructed front because it's a card that is a staple without being overwhelming. But yeah, I can see why they may have decided to take it out. But on the other hand, it's a card so flavorful. Also, it's one of the champion spells, and it's one of the champions that basically is the head of the face of the game. So surprised to see it go.
Yeah. I mean, Darius is overwhelming, but Decimate never.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So next card, again, if I ask 95% of the people don't know what it does, Heroic Charge. And I think this card was just simply forgotten. It has Poppy on its artwork, and it's a strike spell that also stuns. Basically one of Poppy's abilities in League. And I have no idea why it isn't in the Poppy bucket. Seems like a fine card. The slow makes it not overpowered. Basically a Siphoning Strike, weaker effect if you actually like same effect if you kill it. You get it. It's basically Siphoning Strike, different and weaker in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a decent card. Siphoning Strike is a very strong card, so this being a little bit weaker than that, I think is fine. I think it deserves a spot. The interesting thing about this is that at a pinch, it's almost like a vengeance in that even if you don't kill it, it at least removes it from combat, and that's powerful. So and you can do that with a even a weaker creature as well. So literally, you know, a 1/1 can strike an enemy, and if it survives, it still removes it from combat. Saying that, obviously Guile is pretty terrible, but the fact that this has the ability to kill things, but then also the ability to stun things, I think is pretty strong. I think 5 mana, slow to strike an enemy, outside of combat is pretty normal now. I'm thinking of Wild Claws. I think Concerted Strike is probably a bit above rate, but you know, Siphoning Strike, there's quite a lot of 5 mana. An ally strikes an enemy, some version of that with some pluses or minuses. So I think this would have been fine.
And this is one of the cards I think was just forgotten, because with Loping Telescope you might say it's added in later, but this card has Poppy on its artwork, so where would you put it other than in the bucket? Okay, Middenstokke Henchman is next. Can't even write that card. There it is. And it used to be in the cloning program. Before it was buffed even. It was like a 5/3 or something. And I think as a 5/4 it would actually be playable, but would be a pretty feels bad card in my opinion. Play against it. You get hit by it, you get a copy, and it's pretty hard to stop anymore. These deadlines would actually be okay, but I can see why it was moved editions back then, when it still was a 5/3 and was totally unplayable.
I remember when it was a 5/3. But at 5/4, I think it would still be fine. It's nothing special. A 5 mana 5/4 must be blocked. I think it's fine, and it would just will be blocked. So I don't think it'll be anything too exciting. I think it will just be average.
Exactly. Like a feels bad card in some cases.
Yeah, it is certainly very snowbally.
Okay, Cloud Drinker, the big guy whale, is next. Clearly a constructed card that was nerfed as well. It used to have Enlightenment. The burst cards cost 2 less, and it was too powerful with Karma, and then they removed the Enlightenment part. So now it's just burst focus spells cost 1 less. Terrible stats, so worth it in Expedition. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, this is very understated. I assume it's a combo piece somewhere. It could be a combo piece somewhere. So it's an engine, but it's just too difficult to achieve in Expedition. So the understatedness just really costs it. So I can see why it was removed.
Yeah, it does feel like they changed it and they called the kind of whatever they plan or whatever they think it would fit never actually worked out, and that's a card that I think sees no play nowhere.
Like I said, it was too strong. Like the biggest
Yeah.
deck in early games was Karma Trundle, not Trundle, Karma and another Freljord champion, I'm not sure. Basically, Karma goes infinite with 0 cost burst spells. Much to handle. But it got changed, and now it's just left here alone and forgotten.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Same for another late game card, it's Zephyr Sage. By the way, the guy is the small monk in the front, not this giant bird, not the sage, it's actually this front guy. And I've seen this card multiple times in expeditions from trade picks, but I don't think it's a good card. It would just be a 4/4 draw card most of the time. I can see why it's got removed from Ionia. Most of the Ionia card pools are very aggressive now. Actually, is random value. First card wouldn't fit in anywhere except for the Enlightenment.
Yeah, I don't have too much experience with this, given that it hasn't been in expeditions for a while. It doesn't look that terrible to me. 6 mana, 4/4, draw the best card in your hand. It seems okay, but yeah, it seems average really. So
Edu and I lost to it yesterday. We did like a fun run. We were in the finals and they hand buffed a Submersible up to like a 6/6, and then they copied it and then they played 2 6/6 elusives on one turn. And it was pretty brutal. I can see some synergy with it with the hand buff cards. Okay, next up we have some epics that are just not included. We have the Invasive Hydravine, the epic for Diego, and I would think it's just too strong for expeditions. I could also see it being forgotten, but I certainly have the feeling playing it in Bird, just a really strong card, infinite black mist, encroaching mists, infinite sacrifice outlets, and just basically unkillable. Like you have to kill the main one, otherwise you will just lose to it. I can see it being excluded for power reasons. Diego is strong enough anyway. Certainly sad to not see it at all.
yeah,
Basically, you think they lift it out because of power, right? I mean, maybe 2 power for expeditions.
possibly, or just 2 annoying because anything with a round start on every turn, summoning, a free attacker or a free blocker that grows every time is very strong. I think this might be the first card that I've come across that's I think might be warranted to be removed for power reasons. I have faced against it once after it was released, so I'm guessing it must have been from a trade pick, and I think I lost that game. So yeah, it is very strong.
No, I mean, it doesn't see much play nowadays, but I did play and constructed quite a bit of Maokai Viego in one season, and it was a powerhouse. That card, I mean, that card basically it was like 2 champions rolled into one. Very hard to kill, even in constructed. So I can see why it would be terrible to face in expeditions. But I was surprised to see it out because basically it's the card that shines with Viego, which was the star of the show back then. So I don't know, probably just power reasons.
Next one is Shen's Boat. Like the card that draws a Shen. It was like one of the most random cards so far in expeditions, or not in expeditions, in Legends of Terror for me. It's like Shen getting a card that searches him. And I think that this one could be included. Doesn't seem super strong. Druid gets double attack, but like a big double attack unit doesn't win the game on its own. Why this is not in expeditions, but for example the Bright Steel Formation, the 9 mana card, is in expeditions. Very strong.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think Shen will get out of hand if he has his boat and expedition, so I think they could include this in Shen's bucket and be fine.
Yep.
Next one is a pretty random card, in my opinion. It's the Dark guy, Dark Trainer. This one I would assume it would just fit perfectly into the Fizz and Nami bucket, having this Attune payoff and the random short tooth coming out. But I can't think of any reason why this wouldn't be a payoff card in Nami and Fizz.
Yeah, I think this is fairly balanced. 7 mana 6/6 Attune is a bit understated, but obviously its strength comes from getting an almost free 4/2 Overwhelm. So I think this is fine. Normally you would expect the Shark Trainer to die in combat, so hopefully you only get that once. If you get it more than once, then it certainly is very strong. Interestingly enough, it has to be spell mana rather than anything else. You can't actually use non-spell mana for it. But I think this could have been included in expeditions. Plus, it's cute.
One combination I got in labs Yesterday was field promotion into Shark Trainer, so it has Scout, so it summons 2 short 2s by surviving, having the Scout attack. Not something we can do in Expedition. Okay, then we have the Giant Yeti, new one, the Abominable Guardian. Definitely happy to not see this included, like an 8 mana 5/5. That just seems terrible, and it's definitely just a constructed card.
I don't know what it's what's needed in Expeditions to make Yeti strong. Yeah, this doesn't look particularly strong, so summon me from hand as well.
It was pretty broken with a LeBlanc deck for
Okay.
some play, but no, it's just too slow with endless swarm decks. It's a good card, but very synergy heavy. Something you can pull off. Now this next one might be a card that's missing in the bucket or in the tier list in the spreadsheet, but Incisive Tactician used to be a 4/5, now he's a 5/5, and works with LeBlanc basically, and you can infinitely rally with him if you have enough power on the board. Basically infinitely, like as long as you have the mana. They might have been removed, or they might have just missed putting him into these spreadsheets. Personally, I've seen him before in Reputation, not in the draft, but in the games certainly. Could be still there, he could be removed. I'm not sure about that.
What do you mean by infinitely?
So
if you have LeBlanc on board and enough power, basically you keep rallying and generating LeBlanc spell and discounting it, and you can rally again.
Okay, yeah, that's
a copy of it.
I have not seen that before, because generally, if these two come down, they'll usually win on their own without the spell. Usually, LeBlanc finishes the game before she generates that mirror spell. I have played with and against this card a fair bit. I'm surprised that it was supposedly removed, or maybe it's because it's a strong and fun card that people pick it in trade picks quite a lot. I think it's pretty decent. 8 mana 5/5 rally pales in comparison to Tiana Crown Guard. But obviously, what you're hoping for is it's a 6 mana 5/5, which is very strong. Depending on how much you value that rally, we used to have a fairly easy valuation of it being worth about 3. Maybe in Expeditions it's worth about 2, and so 6 mana 5/5 you're kind of getting a 4 mana 5/5 plus the rally, plus both affecting one card. So I think the stats on this were actually pretty strong when it was seeing more play as well.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, we are nearing the end. Only like 4 cards left, and then some honorable mentions. So we have next up the Terror of the Tides, the only, no, not anymore. It was usually the only sea monster in Shadow Isles. Now there's the Sea Scarab, and Terror of the Tides got removed. This one was pretty random for me. Sure, this card has won some games, but an Epic should win games, and was the only reason for me to ever pick up the Shadow Isles half of the sea monster bucket, basically. There's a sick artwork as well, so I'm not sure why they removed that one.
Yeah, I'm looking at it compared to Rad's Bloodmane, and it doesn't look better than Rad's Bloodmane. I'd probably just rather have the Sure Thing most of the time. So I certainly don't think it's too strong or anything.
You can still get it from Troll Hunters, obviously, but not drafted anymore. Next one I'm really sad about and don't really understand is the Leviathan. Like there's 2 Swain card pools, 2 card pools where Swain shows up, and none of them has the Leviathan, sadly. It's a really strong card, really powerful with the Onslaught and the Overwhelm and the big stats. Such an iconic card, and most people who pick Swain will expect to have the chance to see the Leviathan from constructed. Said it's Yeah. What do you think, Herko?
Yeah, said too because said too and I do have a fondness for flavor uh, and Cask with personality, and this is one of the Casks has the most of both, in my opinion. I mean, if it in constructed is a stable card, it does something very interesting. It's powerful. Without being too powerful, it's constructed. So yeah, oh, and also I love Swain, so I'm very very sad that around to play in expeditions.
Yeah, and it's just such a cool artwork. I love the tiny Citybreakers coming out in front of it. Just shows how gigantic this ship actually is.
Yeah, the two of them is certainly a very strong combo, but I think Swain is underpowered in expeditions enough that I think having a buff
Yeah.
with the Leviathan would be worthwhile.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be a big buff because it's an
Yeah,
epic, so
agree.
you don't see it all the time. Okay, next one. I'm very glad they removed that as well, is Voices of the Old Ones. It's obviously prismatic because my main deck is Tyrant's Peak and Constructed, but it's terrible in expeditions, just paying 8 mana to get 2 mana gems and maybe draw a card. Most of the time you don't draw a card. That was just a card that's always unplayable and you never wanted to put it into a deck. Could play it on turn 5 with spell mana, but this was still a waste of your time. Glad it got removed.
Yep, I agree with that. 2 tempo negative.
Yep.
Okay, and the last one, a card I'm really confused why it exists, probably just for labs purposes, is Treasured Trash. And it's the 10 mana, you fill your hand, and they cost 0 and are fleeting, and you can only play 3 more cards this turn. Basically the treasure trove, but as a 10 mana Bandle City spell. Really random card, and I don't think it will ever see play anywhere except for the Earth mode. Certainly wouldn't see play in expeditions.
Would agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty much just trash.
Then I would like to add some 3 honorable mentions. First one is Omen Hawk. This card used to be a powerhouse in expeditions and was included in multiple buckets, but now it's only seen in the fish bones. Basically, if you play Bilgewater and PNC and Freljord, then you have a chance to see a Omen Hawk. So it was basically removed from expeditions, and I would really love for this card to come back because Freljord is not in a good shape right now. Could certainly use the help from this premium one drop.
Yeah, I remember when Omen Hawk was the best one drop that there was, 1 mana 3/3 effectively, and it's very strong, and I wouldn't mind it coming back.
Another one that kind of exists but doesn't really is Battle Fury. Used to be in like 3 different card pools, but it's only in Fluffed and Tuffed now in the Poro archetype. If you see Poros, you should be wary of Battle Fury, but if you don't see many Poros, not a card you should most likely expect anymore. I think it lives in any other card pool. And the third one is, anyone want to talk about Battle Fury? Have a good story. You want to look it up. It really doesn't live in Suit Up.
I remember when it was around, and it's certainly very polarizing of a card in that often it only gets played when it's about to win. So when it's cast on an overwhelmed creature, when it's cast on an unblocked creature, and the extra 8 damage wins the game. I have seen it cast on the 5 mana 4/5 regenerate creature before, which makes it super annoying. But it's very volatile in that if you have a way of dealing with it, the person who deals with it pretty much wins the game. If you don't have a way of dealing with it, it's you pretty much lose the game. So it's a burst spell that really you would like the opponent to tap out beforehand, before they Vengeance or Detain or something like that.
Exactly. So I checked again, it used to be in Suit Up and in the Tryndamere card pool and in Fluffed and Tuft, and now it's only in Fluffed and Tuft. So my statement stands true. You have to only play around it if you see a lot of Poros, basically. So the last card I would like to mention is the Pursuit card. The Pursuit of Perfection is actually, it got changed specifically for expeditions. And this is a very interesting subject that I would just like for them to do more. Because in Constructed you need to play 20 cards, Pursuit of Perfection, but in Expeditions there exists the Accelerated Pursuit. You only have to play 15 cards instead. And I really like that they change cards just for Expeditions, and would certainly like for them to do that a lot more with some of the random epics. For example, with the Invasive Hydravine, just make it a 5/5 in Expeditions if it's wrong. Or yeah, just do that more with the changing cards.
Yeah, when this was around more, I quite enjoyed it. It was a fun mini game of surviving until you get to cast the cat. And particularly easy to do with Heimerdinger, which is why it existed in that archetype, I guess. Since that base set, the game has obviously moved on, and I noticed that I think it was when Targon came in and Obliterate was more popular. Those kind of things made it a lot weaker. You couldn't rely on Catastrophe to just finish the game now. But again, the game has moved on further from that, so I wonder if other things like Zoe will make it stronger as well. So are you saying it's
different card. It's not the same card. It's just it's called Accelerated Pursuit instead of Pursuit of Perfection, and it just says if you played 15 cards instead of 20 cards. So a card that was specifically changed for Expeditions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it still exists in a bucket, right?
Yes,
So,
and also augments.
okay. I just haven't played it for a while, I think, so I haven't seen it either.
I played it in
I
the
think it's the only example.
Yes, it's the only example.
It's the only example of a card.
I like the card a lot as well. I played it on turn 7 before. Like this requirement net of 15 cards on turn 7. And had like iterative improvement, and they obliterated my first one, they stunned my second one, but the third one connected and won me that game. We'll never forget that game. That's awesome. It's just a 1-mana card as well, so you can just replay it immediately with iterative. Yeah, I just wanted to show it, to show that they can change cards specifically for Expeditions.
Yeah.
And should definitely do that more if they want to push this format forward.
Yeah, I wish they did.
So as a conclusion, I would say that some of these cards could be included in Expeditions, others are fine to be excluded, and others just seem like they were just forgotten, basically like the Heroic Charge. I would really wish for them to look over these cards and buckets and maybe balance them out a little bit more and invest some time into making most of these archetypes fair. Some of the stronger ones like Shyvana more high risk by putting weaker cards into.
Yeah, sounds good.
There's nothing you want to add anymore. Let's move on to the ticker card one. It is already going long. Okay, so here we go. We have these 3 different options, and Set, Soul Squirrel, and Recall, Shyvana, Egghead Researcher, Ruined Dragon Guard, Poppy, Graph Grenadier, and Minimorph. And I would first like to tell Herko, can you tell us in our tier list which one would be the one on the top?
That would be an interesting question. Because Shyvana we put at the absolute top, and Poppy we put second. So to anybody being new to the game, what to do, go with Shyvana because it's at the top. For folks that actually have a preference for one champion or the other because they play them distracted, they are so close together that basically you have the cream of the crop. Which you prefer, let's say.
Where's Zed on our list? Is he like a bad champion, or is he like a mediocre champion? Or is he that far off?
Sorry, didn't quite get. Sorry.
Where's Zed on our list? That champion.
Well, I didn't get the name there.
Where is Zed in the champion list?
Sorry. Yes, we have. Sorry, I covered. We have it in the his top 10 at the bottom of the top 10, so that would be a good champion to pick too. Basically, this is high rolling.
Yes, very high rolling.
What we would basically, this is one of the cases in which other factors come into play that you guys are gonna discuss next. Basically, if somebody wants the quick rundown, the cheat sheet basically that printed, go with Shyvana and that's it. But any of these that you pick based on the power that we put, it will be a very, very strong champion. Now, of course, you guys will cover nuances of the case, but these are very, very close in power and very, very powerful.
Okay, Arthur, do you want to start? Which one of these would you go for?
So just starting from the left, I think Zed is a strong champion, and I'm happy to start a draft with Zed. Swole Squirrel, I don't think is particularly strong. The effect, I think, is not worth the fact that it's understated. So I'm not too happy about it. I think it's slightly below average as a card. Recall is terrible. I think it's practically unplayable. I don't think it's worth a card. So overall, that bucket doesn't look that strong to me, with one decent champion, one mediocre follower, and one terrible spell. So the middle one, Shyvana is a fantastic champion in a fantastic region with a fantastic archetype. So she's an all-star. And then Egghead Researcher is a great roadblock to generate more dragons for Shyvana. So Egghead is also fantastic. Rune Dragon Guard recently got buffed inexplicably, presumably for constructed purposes, but in Expeditions was already very strong. But the fact that it's a 3-mana 3/4 with an upside now means it has no downsides. Back when it was a 3-mana 2/4, at least there were times when it felt a bit understated if you didn't get the dragons in play and in hand. But now it's just a 3-mana 3/4, which is exactly on curve on stat with an upside. So that middle pack looks very strong. The third pack actually looks pretty strong as well. Poppy is also a fantastic champion, I think, on par with Shyvana, with how strong she is. Shyvana, I think both has quite high upside and pretty high floors as well. Gruff Grenadier is pretty strong, but might be more situational in the sense that I actually think he's fine without Allegiance, but even better with Allegiance. But it does push your draft in a certain direction. And I think Mini Morph is strong as well. But between the two, I still think that Demacia being, I think, the strongest region is slightly better than Bandle City's second strongest region. So overall, I would still take the middle pack over the right pack.
I totally agree. Champions are such a high power level as well, but I don't like these death cards very much, and don't like this Grenadier. Like, it's fine if you don't have Allegiance, but it's not amazing. And even if you just limit yourself a little bit by going with the Bandle City here and with the Allegiance card, and the Demacia half of Mentors is pretty bad. You have the Vanguard. If I pick this Poppy, I would try to not be Demacia, and why not just play the strongest region. So Shyvana would be the pick here for me as well. Okay, let's go with Shyvana then, and let's see what the second pick is. Okay, pick 2 here. We have the Dragon's Descent, the pairing with Shyvana, the Aurelian Soul, a Herald of the Dragons, and Startle Stomper, the Swain, Miraculous Sentry, Death's Hand, and Disruption card pool, and the Nasus, Akai Sandspinner, and Merciless Hunter players over here. Herko, do you have anything to say, player list-wise, which one would you?
Well, by the way we rated these guys, Swain would be in our trash tier, basically. We put it divided it in 4 columns. It would be basically in the middle of the trash tier. So that's basically, we wouldn't look at him unless we have very good reason to. Of the other two, we rated them as playables, basically the 40% champions that are in the middle. Aurelion Sol, we kind of put it quite high in the list. Basically, that's something that you're quite happy to play with. And while Nasus is a bit lower on that same list, basically. So here, by our list, we would clearly go for Aurelion Sol. Of course, you guys will add nuance to this, and of course, this is the second pick, so there are already considerations to do based on what we picked earlier, of course. But as quick reference, guys, we would pick Aurelion Sol without a doubt, and then we will pick Nasus. They are more or less similar in power, but Aurelion Sol, according to our list, is clearly better, and Swain we would try to avoid as much as possible.
Yeah. Arthur, what would be your pick?
So from the left again, Aurelion Sol is very strong. The recent buff has meant that he pretty much always flips when he reaches 10. So the game is to try and get to survive until level 10, turn 10. Herald of the Dragons has got a buff. I'm still not a huge fan of it, but given that we're starting with already Shyvana and Egghead Researcher, we're already kind of hedging our bets that we'll probably end up getting quite a lot of dragons, which makes it a lot more reliable than otherwise. If you end up with Herald and not enough of dragon synergy, then it's just terrible stats. Startle Stomper is very mediocre. 2 mana, 2/3 Overwhelm is kind of just roadblock along the way of trying to get to Aurelion Sol, so nothing too exciting there. So overall, I would say that pack, Aurelion Sol is definitely the strong part, and the other two is just kind of average, but it also has the upside of pairing well with Shyvana. The middle pack, I agree that Swain is not particularly strong. In fact, I think Swain is weak. It's quite difficult to try and get him to level up, and even if he does, he will usually end up getting blocked all the time. Arachnoid Sentry is fine, but nothing exciting. And Death's Hand, I think, just is also slightly below average. It does a little less damage than I would like out of a 3 mana spell. So I wouldn't want to pick Swain here. The last pack is quite interesting compared to the first pack because I think that Nasus doesn't go with Shyvana as well as Aurelion Sol. I would rather have Aurelion Sol with Shyvana than Nasus with Aurelion Sol. However, but I still think Nasus is quite a strong champion. But the other two creatures, followers, the Bakai, Sandspinner, and the Merciless Hunter, are both very strong followers. Merciless Hunter was so strong that it needed a nerf, but even after the nerf, I still think it's pretty strong. So here is a situation where I think the last pack, the followers, are stronger than the first pack, and I really think it's kind of a toss-up between the left pack or the right pack, the first pack or the third pack. Depends if you want to go for more dragon synergies with Aurelion Sol and Herald of Dragons, or if you want more of a sure thing with some strong followers with Bakai Sandspinner and Merciless Hunter. Between the two regions, it does look like Targon is a bit stronger than Shurima overall, possibly because of the recent buffs to dragons. Shurima is not a particularly strong region, although this, this right pack, third pack, is about as strong as it can get in terms of a Shurima pack. So I wouldn't fault anyone for picking either the left or the right. I think the middle is probably the first to be ignored. But I think if you want more synergy, you can go for left. If you want more raw power, you can go for right. Personally, in this scenario, I think I'd probably just have more fun trying to draft dragons and pick the left one.
Interesting. One thing I want to mention about Swain is that one Concerted Strike levels him up in a Dragon deck most of the time, because it counts, it's non-combat damage, so if you have 2 dragons out, you can level him up, but it's still the worst choice here by far. And I have to agree with Arthur, the other ones are just a toss-up for me as well. Biggest weakness for mid-range, in my opinion, is interaction, and the biggest weakness for Shurima is the late game, but with enough accurate researchers, we have enough late game, and with Shurima, we have enough interaction, so it's quite a natural fit. And I personally would tend to go for, if I want to go for 7, I would go for this Slayer's card pool over the Aurelian Soul, because this Dragon's Descent card pool is a little bit more high rolly and has cards like Herald of the Dragons. You would have some powerful cards, but also some random cards, whereas you can build a very consistent deck with the Rima and Demacia combination. You would also see this Challenger bucket, and it's just the strongest bucket in the game, in my opinion. For me, it would be the right side over this Aurelian Soul, right me loving Aurelian Soul. Okay, that was our big card here, and I want to thank you both so much for joining me again. It was a very long podcast today, and I certainly learned a lot and found it very interesting to hear your analysis on these cards and on these picks. And it's always just a lot of fun to do it, so thank you. And for the viewers, you can check out our Discord, where we are available all the time and do like fun drafts, just chat, and check out our tier list now live as well in the comments. Arthur's calculations and spreadsheet all will be linked in the comments basically. Otherwise, have a nice day. Thanks for watching.